You are listening to Insights from the Conference Board.
Hello, my name is John Metzelaar. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this edition of Insights Podcast, a series brought to you by the Conference Board. Today I'm sitting down with Sean Sheppard to discuss the topic of corporate venture building, which he's doing through his firm U+. Sean, a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, John.
So Sean is bringing an incredible amount of impact, an incredible number of successes, where he is claiming, and he's going to go and prove that to us in this podcast, to have built 90 plus ideas into successful ventures for a total value of $1 billion, over $1 billion. That's an amazing feat. So Sean, why don't you go and introduce yourself, give us the background to who you are, and why you do what you do and how you do what you do.
Yeah, I spent 30 years as a serial tech entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. I founded 5 companies, had 3 exits, and 2 very expensive and valuable learning experiences along the way. And then I moved from being a serial entrepreneur to being a tech investor, launched 3 venture funds, and became a frustrated investor because my companies weren't succeeding, not because they couldn't build products, but because they couldn't build markets. And so I learned very quickly that the focus needed to be on adoption and product market fit, which is defined by having that initial cohort of happy early customers that will tell the world they're better with you than without you. And you can use that to leverage and scale that business opportunity. I got dragged into corporate innovation quite by accident, helping my portfolio of companies get traction with large enterprises and working with their innovation arms, only to find out that they were struggling much in the same way startups were, trying to get traction for their new ideas in the market. And I found out very quickly why they weren't having success. They lacked stage-relevant teams that knew how to build startups with the right mindset and skill set and experience to take something someplace new. They didn't have the right mindset. They didn't have a framework to execute on these ideas and de-risk them as quickly as they possibly could. So I actually was a client of U+ before I became a partner in the business. I had hired them into a corporate client to help us build some new ideas, and found out very quickly that they had the right startup DNA, they had the right experience, and as a result, I ended up taking a stake in the company and have been focused on accelerating new ideas in market through corporate venture building ever since.
Yeah, large corporations are not particularly known for new venture building, and are known to lack that startup spirit. So, what was the biggest shocker when you analyzed the why not at the corporates? It must have been quite a mind shift for you personally.
It was a very eye-opening thing. You know, you spend 30 years in the startup community in Silicon Valley, and you're sort of raised a certain way, right? You recognize that any idea has limited time, money, and resources to find the truth about where it could fit in a market, if it does at all, and what to do about it. Corporations don't think that way. They're very good at operating and growing what already exists, and they try to apply that same sort of mindset and an operating approach to new ideas as they do to existing ideas. And I can tell you that they're very, very different. What's required to take something from 0 to 1 is very different than managing it from 1 to N. And as a result, most of them fail. I think Nielsen says that 95% of innovations don't last 3 years in the market. And in the startup world, it's ironically the success rate's higher than that. It's about 30% last that long in the market. And I think it's because of what they recognize and how they operate, how they behave in the startup world. And I think I think corporates can learn a lot from that. And so we try to bring that mindset and that skill set and that framework to corporations to help them innovate faster, learn quickly, inexpensively about what works and what doesn't.
So that's a dramatic internalization, right? Understanding and recognizing that innovation is the most important way to grow and protect market share and still have 95% of your innovation efforts fail. And then, as you said, while having all the resources to go and blow you past the much more challenging world of startups, the much more challenging experience that startups go through because they don't have all the resources that corporations have. So, I know you have four specific parts of your recipe for corporates to go and take heed and start to incorporate within their corporations. So why don't we go and look at those four? You want to kick us up with number one?
Yeah, I think the most important thing that any organization needs to do is hire stage relevant people to execute on their innovations. What I often see is they'll hire very expensive consultants and pay them by the slide to tell them what to do for the next 3 to 5 years, and then they'll take that deck that they spend $1 million on, and they'll go inside and they'll try and recruit people to actually do something with it. Problem is the right people in the right structure don't exist. And by people, I mean people with the startup attributes, people who can embrace ambiguity, who love to learn, who know how to drive learning, who can operate very creatively and in a very lean way with limited time, money, and resources, to find the truth about where a product fits in the market, how to create a functional learning team out of those people and in pursuit of either profitability or impact, if it's a social venture. And that process will culturally transform how these teams work. But you have to have that startup DNA. And most of organizations don't have that entrepreneurial spirit. Most of the people that founded the companies are either dead or retired, and they've been replaced by great operators who know how to manage what they already know versus create something new. And so there's a huge execution gap that exists between the strategy and the actual execution of getting that idea to a business. Because you're not building products and technology, you are building businesses. You're trying to solve problems for customers. And if you understand that and believe in that, you would reverse engineer the entire approach from the user backwards. And in the lean startup methodologies of Silicon Valley, that's what we do. We don't build anything until we know who the customer is, what their problem is, what the value proposition is, and what they're willing to pay for it. And that's very different than what I see in a lot of corporations. They build first and ask questions later, when they should ask questions first and build based on what they learn.
Well, they start from products very often, right?
Yeah.
They know their product, they love their product, they want to get more out of their product. Instead of, as you said, what are the real problems that you're trying to address? And those problems will have evolved from when they designed their product 20 years ago. And so that's where I think a large disconnect lies.
Yeah.
And stepping beyond what you know and what you love is just very, very hard, right?
Yeah, and the closer you are to your core business, the easier it is to innovate. The core business innovations where you're trying to make incremental improvements on what you already know. Companies can be quite successful at that. Where they start to run into challenges is when they get separated from that core business, the adjacency stuff, trying to enter new markets with new ideas, or the disruptive things, or what they think might be disruptive, the things that might cannibalize their current business, but they need to do because if they don't, they'll end up like Yellow Cab in the age of Uber. And it's really important for them to have a standardized approach towards all of those things with the right people. And that's the critical difference that I see. They don't have the right folks in the right roles with the right attributes.
So stage relevant teams that are focusing on understanding the market, identifying the problems the consumers face, and only then start to translate that into not necessarily focusing on products and services, but also building businesses. I find that to be a significant phrase that you just used before.
That's right.
Very few innovators, frankly, immediately leap to building a business.
Yeah, and you have to start with that. As an investor, the first thing I ask people is, what's your business model?
Yeah.
How do you plan to make money or deliver impact? And if you can't identify and construct a sound business model hypothesis before you start your idea, then you're already on the wrong path.
So stage relevant teams for market, consumer, and business. Now that's number one. That's number one, right? What's number two? Number two's got something to do with mindset, right?
Number two has to do with having a safe space, right? You need to have a safe space to do your work. Your people have to have a growth mindset, not a fixed mindset. They have to love to learn. They have to be, let's just say, ambitiously curious about the consumer or the user of their product. And they need a place where they can learn quickly, cheaply, and quietly until they find scale. Once you've identified scale, then you can have a broader conversation with the core business about where do we go from here? Do we spin it out? Do we continue to operate it as a standalone? Do we integrate it back into a platform-based approach where where it might be a product on a platform, or it might be a platform itself? What are the options there? Do you want to fund it with external resources? Do you want to fund it internally? And then you can intelligently think about what to do. But until you get to scale, you need a safe, quiet place, and you need air cover from your stakeholders to be able to do your work. And that means running daily stand-ups with the teams that are responsible for doing the work, weekly insights reviews with the broader management team. Here's what we learned this week and what we're going to do differently next week based on that. And then monthly steering committees with the broader stakeholders, so they have transparency into the framework, what you're learning, what the outcomes are, and what you're doing about it, because that learning leads to revenue. Oftentimes I see these large organizations measure startup activities the same way they measure their day-to-day business activities. They're not the same. Don't ask somebody for a 5-year forecast when they don't even know what the future is because they have no past, as an example.
Yeah, this whole safe space hugely resonates with me. And I take this into, it's no surprise that Amy Edmondson was voted the number one thinker with Thinker 50 this year for the first time. I think she was number 3 the year before, or 2 years before COVID, because she introduced the concept of learning culture, a learning organization grounded in psychological safety already in, I guess, 20 years ago. And this finally, this internalization is finally hitting, and then that's connecting with the other hot book, which is by Carol Dweck, Mindset, where she indeed separates growth mindset from fixed mindset. If you combine those two elements, that creates a powerful environment for corporations and people within the corporations to do what you just described, but it continues to be elusive.
I agree. Well, I mean, we are, and Carol and Amy both speak about it. Carol's work talks about how, society essentially forces us into a fixed mindset from the time we go to school.
Yep.
Mistakes are bad. And as a result, we operate in a way to avoid mistakes. But in the startup world, we embrace failure, and we only see it as failure if you don't learn from it. And so the organization has to get that mindset that you need to fail fast, you need to fail cheaply, you need to fail quietly, so that you can learn what actually does work.
Yeah, brilliant. So you created this safe space, you created this environment of curiosity, learning, collaboration, but then you also need to unleash the people, right? And that's where the organization construct comes in, your stakeholders. So let's get into number 3.
Yeah.
Aligned and accountable stakeholders.
That's right. Aligned and accountable stakeholders. One of the primary reasons I see corporates innovations fail is a lack of accountable and aligned stakeholders. I see many, many people go from managing an innovation to managing their career when things start going sideways. And in a startup, and taking anything new to market, it's going to go sideways a lot. There's not this straight hockey stick line that people think exists. It's a jagged edged experience from the beginning until you actually find repeatable, predictable, scalable profitability. And so you need people who will support you in that will give you the safe space, the air cover, and access to their ecosystem so that you can get what you need to learn. Corporates have a tremendous opportunity to outcompete the startup community because they have the resources, they have the ecosystem, they have the relationships, and they have the subject matter experts. So if they just focused on identifying what technologies are being adopted every day by their ecosystem and fast follow and build those things, they would be able to stay relevant and out in front and keep and grow market share. The problem is that they don't have the teams, they're not organized, and they don't have that execution framework to do it. And oftentimes they don't have aligned stakeholders in full support of that.
Yeah, I've seen this in my experience as well, both at P&G before, but also now talking to many corporations, that there is it's ironic that so many innovators are frustrated, and so you have a really cool job, right? Being an innovator should be a cool job, but they find that they don't get that, what you call air cover. They don't get that support. There is no sponsor who is really committed for them and with them to go and design the future.
And they're
And
not
that is, by the
incentive.
way, that's mostly at the commercial side. And I know you have a big passion for that as well, right?
Well, one of the big gaps I see in how teams are organized, it's one thing to have stage relevant teams, but you have to have the right roles as well. The biggest gap I see is they lack a true commercialization lead that runs the project and is responsible for the business model outcomes and reports directly to those stakeholders. They drive the bus. They are the chief learning officer. In the startup world, we call them the business side co-founder or the non-tech co-founder. And a commercial lead isn't just somebody who has sales or marketing expertise, but they have go-to-market expertise. They know how to translate the feedback from the market to the product owner who they work alongside to translate that into useful, valuable feature sets that people will actually use and pay for. They know how to identify early adopters and innovators to recruit, to partner with them, who share their vision, understand their reality, and are willing to give them the two things they need most at this stage, which is their time and their truth. And that's not easy. Most people today won't tell us the truth if it creates more work or conflict. So you've got to be obsessed with that experience, and somebody has to drive that, and it should be the commercialization leader. They own the commercialization of the product. And then the second big one is digital product ownership. People who know how to manage technical and design teams to translate all that feedback that's passing through the commercialization leader into a lovable product that creates real value and that translates into a scalable business model.
I liked how you translated, or how you took your MVP into an MLP.
Yes, minimum lovable product. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to strive for that, because that's the only way that you get lasting traction. People need to be able to say, I can't live without this. And that's when you know you found it.
And then hopefully you have the right sponsor to go and bring that back into the core business, into a core business that allows you to scale it.
But you also need to lead them down this path. You can't just wait for them to tell you what to do. You have to tell them what you're doing. And that's why you need to have a very robust and portfolio-based approach towards venture building, which is the fourth insight. Once you've defined a process, so our process is ideate, validate, test, build, and scale. Okay, and at every stage you have a team that's made up in a certain way, with a certain level of with a certain set of activities and outcomes, and those are learning-based outcomes, all the way through build, and then you get to revenue-based outcomes in scale. And only at scale do you actually start to show this to the world inside the business and expose it for what it is. Because if you do it sooner than that, it can easily get derailed by a number of different, people and or let's say politics or other things that could take you off path. So if you have that process, you can then put agile teams in place to continuously innovate on as many of these ideas as you have time and budget and ambition for. We have some clients that have us running 6, 7 ideas at a time. Every quarter, we're reviewing those and deciding which ones we want to keep, which ones we want to pivot, and which ones we want to kill. And as a result, we're able to de-risk these things significantly and get them to market a lot faster and a lot cheaper.
I was at a recent panel conversation, and I was joined by a guy from Cambridge. I forgot his name, and he said, we should stop talking about R&D. We should talk about ENS. And this was already several years ago, and I had no idea where he was going. I go like, ENS? What do you mean? He said, well, experimentation and scale. R&D is so outdated. And indeed,
Yes.
we're spending so much money against R&D, but where is the experimentation? Where is the multifunctional experimentation? Where is the market, the consumer, the business experimentation? And then where's the scaling ultimately that happens from that, right? And so it's great to hear you say that. You mentioned earlier to me that Amazon is a model for you, right? Because they're running thousands of experiments every day, correct?
Yes, they're quite famous in the tech circles for the number of experiments they run. Last I heard, they're running 30,000 experiments a month across every aspect of their business.
Yeah,
And
crazy.
and Jeff Bezos's ethos from day one is completely obsessed with the customer and its experience. And as I said to you, there's a reason Amazon's the most valuable company in the world. It's not because of what they make; it's because of what they make easy.
Well, and he is also the chief learning officer in the sense that you were talking about before. If only more companies would adopt that, maybe the not the I guess also the term, but even the theme, the principle, that
Right.
would
And
be
how many
it's
times do you think they've pivoted? He started out selling books online. And
correct.
look at him now. Right. So getting that wedge, and that's a great example of what a good, solid innovation go-to-market strategy is all about. You find a wedge, a way to get a hook into a user, and then you can build from that. But you have to have that one thing. What's that one thing that will get them to adopt, use, and pay for what you're providing? And that's what market testing and validation is all about. And I see so many organizations not do enough testing, not do enough experimenting, not doing enough user interviews and research directly with early adopter mindsets that can help them find those things.
So you need stage relevant teams. You need a growth mindset linked to psychological safety for a safe environment. And then you need to have the appropriate construct around you with the appropriate sponsorship, right commercial lead, and the organizational environment that unleashes the culture of innovation, that learning culture that you want to create. Now, there's one
And
more
you need a
thing,
standard framework.
number four.
Yeah, you
Sorry?
need that standard execution framework that you can show to your stakeholders and say, this is how we are going to operate our innovation going forward. And it doesn't matter what the product or service is. These are the stage relevant teams that do this work at every stage, and the outcomes will be, we will find the truth. What we do with that truth is entirely a different matter. If you have the right growth mindset, you're going to pivot into what customers want instead of what you think they want. And you're going to prioritize and focus on that. But you've got to have a clear, transparent framework that can help you manage up so that you get the resources and the runway you need to continue to innovate.
And for that, by the way, that's leading us to number four, I guess, is you need the appropriate skill sets. Digitally native, I think you call them skill sets.
Yes. So at U Plus, we don't hire anybody that hasn't worked in a startup. You have to have had startup experience to work for us, because what we do every day is supply startup teams to this framework that are stage relevant. Again, 0 to 1 is very different than 1 to N. The attributes of those folks, and you need them in areas of product design, technology development, and market development, which is the commercialization piece. And so we view ourselves as sort of non-dilutive co-founders in your startup effort. Most organizations try to cobble this all together. They rely on internal IT teams who aren't necessarily designed to build businesses, but rather to support them. They might work with standard marketing and sales parts of their organization or agencies that don't know 0 to 1, but know 1 to N. They might work with traditional dev shops who don't consider or have the business and art market acumen to push back on what they're building instead of building what they're told. And as a result, they struggle. So you have to have an organization that's designed for that.
Excellent. All right, Sean, I think we've covered maybe not everything, obviously, in a 20-minute, 25-minute podcast, but we've covered your four principles. Is there anything else that you want to bring to our members and our audience that we haven't talked yet? Anything you want to reinforce, maybe?
Just, your favorite saying and mine, traction speaks louder than words.
Yes.
Prioritize your ideas based on the fastest path to traction with the least amount of time, money, and resources to do it, because strategic quick wins matter as you're trying to build your innovation operation. They will get you the resources and runway you need from the stakeholders to continue to grow what you're doing.
And learn and experiment and do. Peter Sims says this very nicely in his book, Little Bets. We got to do things to learn what to do.
That's right. Be a learn-it-all, not a know-it-all.
Well said. So these are good slogans to end with, but they're profound. They're not empty slogans. So with that, I want to just thank everyone for listening to this podcast. I hope you enjoyed this. You found it valuable. You picked up some insights. You've heard principally, fundamentally, what it takes to do corporate venturing, but of course, there's much more when it comes to execution. I wish you good luck in getting on with this challenge. Your company needs it. The world needs it. Thanks again for listening. And in particular, thank you, Sean, for having spent this half hour with us. This was a insightful session. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I hope we'll do more of those into the future.
I hope so too, John. I enjoy it. Thank you so much for having me.
And all the best wishes to you plus and all your customers that you're serving. All right. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe to our Insights podcast series or explore the entire catalog of podcast programming from the Conference Board by visiting our website at tcb.org/podcasts. Thank you again, Sean. Thank you again, audience. Hope to see you again and hear you again. Bye.
This has been Insights from the Conference Board.